Watercolor with somebody who was never formally trained in watercolor. With somebody who was never formally trained in watercolor. We are using cheap supplies watercolor because I'm a broke somebody who was never formally trained in watercolor. Let's begin. So this is my sketch that I have already drawn for us to paint today. It's colored. This is my color pencil. That way it doesn't show up underneath the watercolor. So our first step is to take this big fluffy boy we have of a brush right here and dip him in some water and then start wetting the area that you're going to start painting first. So you're going to color block sort of with this water. That way it doesn't leave the space you're trying to paint in. So we're going to do the face first just because that's easiest to see right off the bat, and that's just how I paint. The space you're trying to paint in. What you're looking for. So we're going to do the face first just because that's easiest to see right off the bat, and that's just how I paint. So just the space you're trying to paint in.
Now what you're looking for here.
So we're going to start by mixing our color, and you'll see that a lot of people who do watercolor painting just how I paint. Take it right out of this cake palette here and then put it directly onto the paint, onto the paper, and that is incorrect. That is how you get inconsistent pigment. And you can't make pretty colors that way. You can't really mix colors in the palette. I mean, you can, but we're not 6 here, so we're going to try and be a little more professional about it. So I'm going to take my little watercolor painting for just picking up water. I'm going to use this divot right here, put some water in there, and then pick the colors that I want to do for my skin. We're going to do more of an olive tone skin today, just because I feel like we do the typical red undertoned white person just way too much in art, and I'm kind of tired of seeing it. We're going to take our base brown and red, which is typically what you'll use to make the basic part of a skin tone. So I'm going to use this orangey brown right here. I'm going to pick that up with my brush. I'm going to drop that in our little water droplet that we have going on right there. Now I'm going to wash that off so I don't contaminate my palette. I'm going to take this red right here and put it in there. Wash that off so I don't. This will be the base that we use to make skin tone for this character from now on. I'm going to swatch that color for you on the back here so you can see what you're doing. That's typically a good thing to do when you're watercolor painting, is to have either thick enough paper that you can swatch on the back or another piece of paper that you can swatch colors on, just so you know what you're working with before you put it on. Wash that off so I don't. Watercolor painting is to have either thick enough paper that you can swatch on the back or another piece of paper that you can swatch colors on, just so you know what you're working with before you put it on and it's permanent. Watercolor painting is to have either thick enough paper that you can swatch on the back or another piece of paper
as I applied it to
you put it on and it's permanent. Watercolor painting is to have that color, and you're just going to start around in that area that you already laid that water base down on. Watercolor painting is what you're going to do is you're going to take that and you're just going to start spreading around in that area that you already laid that water base down on. Watercolor painting. What you're going to do is you're going to take that color and you're just going to start base shading put down. What I'm actually going to do next is do a little bit of a green and reddish undertone just to give the cheeks some life. Watercolor painting is to have what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a watered down color what we were using. I'm actually going to do next a little bit of red. Mix that in painting is to have put those on the lips. Just because you know, just going to start. Most people's lips aren't the same color as the
just to get. Be sure to allow
watercolor painting is to have that color, and you're just going to start.
You don't get any smudging.
But I'm actually going to do next.
If you apply too much paint or you smudge it, as long as it is still
watercolor painting is to
paper and just blot it up. And it's pretty much entirely gone. But a good thing about watercolor.
I'm actually going to do next. We're going to do next is take that color that we were working with. Watercolor painting is to not the one that we just used the red with, because that would be. I'm actually going to do next the color we're using for skin. So to do our undertone, to do our watercolor painting is shadows and just wash over the top. That way I'm actually going to do next. We're using for skin to do our undertone, to do our shadows and just wash over the top. That way. Just a little tip, don't forget to let it dry in between layers. Sometimes it can be really, really tempting to just keep going, but what you can do is get really runny colors that way, and then it'll be tempting to just keep going. But what you can do is get really runny colors that way, and it'll get mud watercolor. So this is just sort of me as a beginner giving you the lowdown on what I have learned as I have gone. So we're gonna let that dry for a minute.
As you can
Giving you the lowdown on what I have learned as I have gone. So we're gonna let that dry for a minute.
Getting that pigment really nice and
giving you the lowdown on what I have learned as I have gone.
Melds and you get
so we're gonna let that dry for a minute.
I like a little bit more of a three-dimensional look to mine, but if when you're trying
giving you the lowdown on what I have learned as I have gone. So we're gonna let that dry for a minute.
Try getting good base.
Giving you the lowdown on what I have learned as I have gone. So we're gonna let that dry for a minute.
Audio, and I'm trying to explain something to you at this point, but
giving you the lowdown on what I have
was because all of my audio is gone.
Learned as I have gone.
Start the hair. You can see
so we're gonna let that dry for a minute.
Block out the shape for the
giving
hair.
you the lowdown on what I have
done eventually. Speed talk through that. That's actually really simple.
So we're gonna let that dry for a minute.
Here, I actually take my
giving you the lowdown on what I have
tubed watercolors, and I mix the hair color with that.
So we're gonna let that dry for a minute.
Because the hair has more surface area.
Giving you the lowdown on what I have
with the end of my brush, not the bristles of my brush, so I don't ruin. And then
so we're gonna let that dry for a minute.
Basically, just start filling in those shadows.
Giving you the lowdown on what I have.
You can just see I'm going through and basing out the shape of each individual rock that I wanted to be shown, adding
giving you the lowdown on what I have.
Not the bristles of my brush, so I don't shadow and depth to each shape. That way, everything just sort of has that three-dimensional feel to it.
Giving you the lowdown on what I have.
Pretty much the same basic premise. Now I'm going over and I am using a more watered down version of that to fill in all of the colors in the hair. When doing this, be careful not to use too much water or scrub too much, or you'll lose the lines that you put down originally, and that's a shame. From here, I actually fill in the eyebrows using a very, very small brush so I can make it look like the individual hairs on the eyebrow. You don't have to do this if you're painting somebody. You can actually just the specific style that I like drawing in. I prefer to have the individual hairs present. Now what I'm trying to do here is outline the hair, but I actually made a mistake and pulled it directly out of the pan, and it just wasn't a color that I liked. It wasn't working for me, so I ended up deciding to use the color that I had already mixed for the hair to just add a little more depth and dimension and detail to all of the hair, just give it more strands, more texture. Texture is very important. So you can just see me kind of filling that stuff in. Now I'm doing the eyes. The eyes are really simple. I just picked a yellow and orange and then a brown tone to give her warm brown eyes. It's mostly about shading. A lot of the time the color will be darker towards the top eyelid because it's covered by your brow bone. Now I'm doing the eyelashes. Same basic premise as the eyebrows. Thin brush. Slow detail. What I didn't show was me actually doing the lining, which I used the black watercolor tube. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is me showing the final product. I hope you guys try to watercolor in the future. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye, guys. See you next video.